She was just another piece of wreckage in Sector 9 until her armor started humming under my tools. When I tried to stabilize the power conduits, she whispered, "You're touching me too gently," through cracked plating. That's when I knew this wasn't a standard repair job. Her sigils glowed with authority no ordinary warrior should possess, and suddenly my quiet workshop felt like the center of a galactic conspiracy. The question isn't whether I can fix her armor. It's whether I can survive what happens when she's operational again. Sector 9 ran on a simple economy of breakdowns and patch jobs. Kalen maintained the delicate balance between functional systems and total collapse. His world consisted of aging conduits that flickered like faulty neon signs and bulkheads that groaned under the strain of keeping vacuum at bay. There was a certain satisfaction in making broken things work again, like solving the same comforting puzzle every day. The station's hum was his backdrop, a low, steady vibration that spoke of reactors running just within tolerance. He knew each rattle in the environmental systems, each hiccup in the gravity plating. It was a language of decay, and he was fluent. Nothing surprised him here. Scavenger runs were methodical. Locate derelict tech, check for radiation or biohazards, haul it back and get it running. Assess secure transport repair. A predictable loop that kept the lights on. That particular salvage should have followed the script. A mid-level combat vessel, moderately damaged, adrift in the debris field. Standard markings, no anomalous energy readings. He'd tethered it to his shuttle without a second thought. Back in the workshop, under the cool glow of work lamps, he began the usual diagnostics. Scorch marks, fused circuitry, the familiar scent of ozone and heated metal. Then the rhythmic hum began. Not the station's ambient thrum, but something lower, more intentional. At first he thought it was a feedback loop in the power systems. He adjusted the dampeners, ran another diagnostic. The sound persisted, syncopated, almost like a heartbeat. His scanner flickered, picking up biometric signatures where there should have been only mechanics. Life signs, faint but unmistakable. Protocols didn't cover this. Manuals talked about coolant leaks and energy surges, not this. The armor plating wasn't just armor. It was integrated, fused to something living. His routine had just handed him a patient, not a machine. He looked at the scoring along the chest plate. Phaser burns, close range. Someone had tried very hard to make sure whoever was in there didn't walk away. The humming grew steadier as he worked, a soft, vibrational thrum that seemed to respond to his proximity. His tools registered energy flows that defied standard wiring diagrams. This wasn't a repair anymore. It was a rescue, and the consequences of getting it wrong stretched far beyond a wasted afternoon. That's when he noticed the faint, rhythmic pulse beneath his fingers. Not machinery, but something alive. Holding on. The salvage run had yielded standard debris, twisted support beams, shattered viewports, the usual casualties of deep space collisions. Kalen moved through the wreckage with practiced efficiency, his mag boots clinging to torn hull plating. His scanner pinged weakly at a larger fragment drifting 20 meters starboard, probably another damaged power relay or compromised life support unit. Just another piece of broken tech to be stripped for parts. He maneuvered closer, the beam of his helmet lamp cutting through the particulate haze. The object was larger than he'd estimated, roughly humanoid in shape but encased in what looked like advanced combat armor. That was unusual. Most wreckage here came from civilian freighters or old mining rigs. Military-grade hardware didn't usually end up in Sector 9 unless something had gone very wrong. The armor was scorched along the left side, blackened marks radiating from what looked like a direct energy weapon hit. The positioning was all wrong for abandoned equipment. It lay curled slightly, one arm bent as if bracing for impact. This wasn't something someone had jettisoned. This was someone who'd been trying to survive when their ship gave out. His scanner flickered as he came within 3 meters. The readings made no sense. Instead of the expected power drain or system failure patterns, it registered erratic energy pulses that spiked and fell like a struggling heartbeat. Then the biometric indicators lit up. Faint but unmistakable. Core body temperature, respiration rate, neural activity. Where there should have been diagnostic ports and circuitry, his instruments found living tissue. He switched to medical scanning mode, half convinced it was a sensor ghost. The results came back the same. Life signs critically low but present. The armor wasn't just armor. It was some kind of integrated life support system, and it was failing. The chest plate showed hairline fractures where the energy blast had caught it, and through the cracks he could see something that looked suspiciously like biomechanical interface points. Every repair protocol he knew said to quarantine unknown biological hazards, to call for specialized medical teams, to not touch something that might be leaking radiation or pathogens. But the readouts showed oxygen levels dropping, heart rate becoming more irregular. This wasn't a machine malfunction. It was a patient coding. He ran a hand over the cracked plating, feeling the subtle vibration within. Not machinery. Something warmer, more fragile. The ethics of it were simple, really. You don't walk away from someone dying in vacuum, no matter how many warning lights your board is showing. His tools were designed for fixing circuits, not suturing flesh, but they'd have to do. He activated his laser cutter, set to the lowest precision setting. First, he'd need to stabilize the life support, then see about getting that armor open without killing whoever was inside. If they weren't already gone, the scanner showed one more weak pulse. Still there, still fighting. Kalen had the med scanner primed, running through the standard triage protocol he'd used 100 times on injured crew members. Check vitals, assess trauma levels, stabilize critical systems. He leaned closer to the cracked faceplate, expecting labored breathing, maybe a request for water or pain meds, the kind of things people say when they're clinging to the edge. What came through the speakers wasn't a plea. It was a series of crisp, clear operational commands. Divert auxiliary power to neural sync nodes. Bypass primary regulator. Do not attempt direct interface without dampening field. The voice was strained but carried an unnerving amount of authority, like a flight controller talking a rookie through a rough landing. It didn't ask. It directed. He blinked, scanner hovering midair. This wasn't in any medical manual. He started to say something about calling the station medics, but she cut him off. Medical personnel are irrelevant. Focus on the armor integrity. My systems are failing because the harmonic dampeners are offline. She recited calibration sequences he'd never heard of, referencing tech that sounded more theoretical than practical. Standard military training didn't cover quantum-locked plating or bioreactive circuitry. He tried again to suggest proper medical oversight, but she dismissed it with a tone that left no room for argument. The armor is the priority, not the occupant. That phrasing stuck with him. The occupant. Like she was referring to equipment, not herself. 3 sentences in, and the dynamic had completely flipped. He wasn't the rescuer making choices anymore. He was the technician following orders. Her commands were specific, technical, and assumed he would comply without question. She gave frequency ranges for energy tools, torque settings for plating screws, even advised him on how to avoid triggering defensive protocols he didn't know existed. He found himself adjusting his equipment according to her instructions, setting his laser cutter to a frequency he'd only ever used for fine ceramic work. The armor responded almost immediately, the humming stabilizing into a cleaner, steadier rhythm. It was efficient, professional, and deeply unsettling. She wasn't just someone who'd seen combat. This was someone who understood systems on a level beyond standard military training. Her directions included contingencies, fallback procedures, and references to protocols that weren't in any database he could access. She spoke about her own armor like an engineer discussing a complex machine, with no hint of personal fear or urgency, just operational necessity. Kalen realized he wasn't dealing with a soldier following orders. This was someone who gave them, the kind of person who expected compliance, not cooperation. He stopped suggesting alternatives and just followed instructions. It was simpler that way, and honestly more effective. Her directions fixed problems he wouldn't have known how to approach. The repair shifted from emergency medicine to a tactical operation, one where he was taking orders from a patient who seemed more concerned with hardware than her own survival. He began with standard diagnostics, running his scanner over the damaged chest plate. Standard procedure, check for energy leaks, structural weaknesses, power fluctuations. His tools registered the expected readings at first. Carbon scoring, microfractures, compromised circuitry. Then the patterns started shifting. Instead of consistent energy flows, he got pulses that seemed to respond to his own movements. When he moved his hand left, the readings spiked. When he pulled back, they settled. It felt less like scanning equipment and more like playing theremin with a moody instrument. Ancient-looking sigils etched into the armor's surface began to glow where his tools made contact. They weren't LED indicators or holographic displays. They were organic patterns that lit up from within, like bioluminescent algae responding to touch. The light pulsed in time with the energy fluctuations, creating a visual rhythm that matched the scanner's erratic readings. Every time he adjusted his position, the pattern shifted, as if the armor was mapping his movements. The biometric sensors told the strangest story. They showed neural activity syncing with the armor's systems, as if the suit wasn't just worn but integrated. Heart rate matched power output, respiration synchronized with cooling vents. Standard armor protected the wearer. This seemed to share biology with its occupant. When he tried standard repair techniques, applying conductive gel to fractured circuits, the armor reacted defensively. Microfilaments emerged from the cracks, retracting from the gel like living tissue rejecting foreign material. His equipment started acting up. The diagnostic scanner began showing interference patterns that made no engineering sense. The laser calibrator kept resetting itself to frequencies he hadn't programmed. Every adjustment he made produced harmonic responses that made his tools vibrate uncomfortably in his hands. It felt less like fixing machinery and more like trying to perform surgery on something that kept changing the rules of anatomy. The armor seemed to be assessing him as much as he was assessing it. When he approached with tools it didn't recognize, the sigils would dim warningly. When he used techniques that matched its unknown protocols, they brightened approvingly. It responded to confidence, to firm, deliberate movements. Hesitation made the systems fluctuate unpredictably. The whole experience felt like trying to calm a nervous animal while simultaneously rewiring its nervous system. Kalen realized this wasn't manufactured technology in any conventional sense. The boundary between suit and wearer was theoretical at best. The systems didn't just support life. They seemed to be alive themselves, with responses that suggested awareness, preference, even personality. Standard repair logic didn't apply here. You couldn't troubleshoot sentience with a multimeter. The humming wasn't machinery, it was breathing. The energy patterns weren't circuits, they were pulses. This was biotechnology so advanced it blurred the line between equipment and organism. He was working on something that felt less like a suit of armor, and more like a symbiotic partner. Kalen ran through the standard classifications in his head. The armor design suggested frontline combat use. The weapon damage indicated recent, intense engagement. The way she'd been found, collapsed but positioned defensively, all pointed to military training. He mentally filed her under warrior, probably special forces given the tech level. It was a clean, simple category. He knew how to interact with soldiers. They followed protocols. They had clear chains of command. This was a box he understood. Her response was immediate and absolute. I am no mere warrior. The words weren't defensive or proud. They were declarative, a simple correction of fact. The dismissal was so complete it left no room for argument. She wasn't claiming to be more than a warrior. She was stating she was something entirely different. The classification wasn't just wrong. It was insufficient to the point of being irrelevant. He looked at the armor again, seeing it with new eyes. The craftsmanship was beyond any standard military issue. The materials weren't just advanced. They were unique. The etching patterns weren't unit insignias or rank markings. They were intricate, almost ceremonial, filled with a metallic sheen that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This wasn't mass-produced equipment. It was custom work, the kind of thing that required resources far beyond any military budget. Someone had built this for her specifically. Her command presence made sense now. It wasn't the practiced authority of an officer giving orders. It was the innate expectation of obedience that came from a different kind of hierarchy. When she spoke, she didn't suggest or request. She informed. Her references to systems and protocols weren't from any manual he'd seen. They were about governance structures, historical precedents, long-term strategic assets. She wasn't thinking about the next engagement. She was considering the next decade of political maneuvering. The way she assessed situations confirmed it. When he'd mentioned the approaching ships, she didn't ask about weapons or shields. She asked about diplomatic status, treaty affiliations, political relationships. She wanted to know who had jurisdiction, what laws applied, which factions might be manipulated. A warrior thinks about winning the fight. She was thinking about winning the war, and then governing what remained afterward. Tactical thinking versus strategic planning. The difference was fundamental. Kalen's assumptions about rank and status dissolved. Military rankings were about chain of command, but her authority seemed to operate outside that structure entirely. She didn't refer to superiors or subordinates. She spoke of allies and obligations, of historical rights and responsibilities. Her power wasn't delegated. It was inherent, derived from something older and more permanent than any military appointment. He understood now. The armor wasn't combat equipment. It was ceremonial wear that happened to be combat capable. The weapon wasn't her primary tool. It was a last resort. Her real power resided in her position, her connections, her knowledge of systems that had nothing to do with warfare. She wasn't a weapon to be deployed. She was a center of gravity around which events organized themselves. The repair job had just become exponentially more complicated. Fixing her armor wasn't about restoring a soldier to duty. It was about restoring a key piece in a political system he didn't understand. The tools in his hands felt suddenly inadequate for the weight of what they were handling. Kalen reached for his datapad, pulling up the standard identification form. Name, rank, affiliation. Standard questions for anyone who ended up in his workshop under unusual circumstances. He expected something generic, maybe a call sign or unit designation, something that would keep this firmly in the realm of standard operational weirdness. The name landed like a physical object in the room. Sarai Valtheran. The air pressure seemed to shift. It wasn't just a name. It was a historical marker, a reference point he'd heard in news briefs and station gossip for months. The missing heir, the vanished political figure, the one whose disappearance had triggered those carefully worded government statements about periods of transition and administrative realignments. His memory-supplied context he hadn't known he'd absorbed. News feeds showing diplomatic functions. Her image standing beside officials who now ran the core worlds. Whispers in docking bays about how quiet the Valtheran holdings had gone. The official bulletins that never quite explained what happened. Just that things were being handled. He'd assumed it was typical political noise. The kind of distant power struggle that didn't affect repair schedules in Sector 9. The pieces snapped together. The high-level combat damage wasn't from some border skirmish. It was from someone trying very specifically to eliminate her. The secrecy wasn't operational security. It was survival. Her presence here in the most forgotten sector of the system meant she'd successfully evaded professional hunters for months. This wasn't a random drifting casualty. This was someone who'd been running a precise, desperate evasion pattern across star systems. The exile status explained everything. The armor's non-standard tech, the command presence that felt out of place on a soldier, the way she'd dismissed his questions about medical help. Standard rescue protocols assumed you were dealing with accidents or routine casualties. They didn't account for political targets who might be followed by teams with shoot-to-kill orders. His workshop didn't feel like a medical bay anymore. It felt like a safe house that wasn't nearly safe enough. The standard forms on his datapad suddenly looked naive, like trying to file a parking ticket for a starship collision. Every procedure he knew was built around normal circumstances. There was no protocol for harboring exiled political figures wanted by the current government. The repair job was secondary now. Keeping her alive meant understanding that people with significant resources wanted her dead. That changed the priority from medical stabilization to security containment. His workshop's locks were designed to keep out curious scavengers, not professional extraction teams. The environmental systems could handle a coolant leak, but they weren't equipped to filter out biotoxins or suppress energy weapons. He looked at the armor again, seeing it not as damaged equipment but as evidence. The scorch marks weren't from random combat. They were from attempted assassination. The biometric readings weren't just vital signs. They were a countdown until someone found them. Standard procedure said to report this to station security. New reality said station security might be working for the people who wanted her gone. The political had just become personal, and his quiet repair bay had become the most dangerous place in the sector. Kalen worked with the delicate precision of someone defusing a bomb. His tools moved in careful arcs, applying minimal pressure to damaged connectors, avoiding any movement that might stress the fractured plating. He'd repaired enough delicate systems to know that force usually created more problems than it solved. Gentle, methodical, controlled. That was how you fix things without breaking them further. The armor's subtle hum seemed to agree, maintaining a steady if weak vibration under his careful touch. Then the whisper came through the external speakers, so quiet he almost mistook it for interference. "You're touching me too gently." The words weren't strained or pained. They were calm, instructional like a pilot correcting a co-pilot's approach. He froze. Laser cutter hovering millimeters from a power coupling. That wasn't what you expected to hear from someone hovering near system failure. It wasn't a complaint about his technique. It was operational feedback. Her systems required firm, decisive contact to establish proper interface connections. The biomechanical linkages needed positive pressure to realign, like resetting a dislocated joint. Gentle probing just made the neural sync fluctuate, disrupting the energy flow patterns that kept her stable. His caution was literally making things worse. The repair shifted from a one-way operation to a collaborative process. She began directing his movements with quiet precision. Apply full pressure to the dorsal node. The plating will resist. Ignore it. He did, leaning into the armor with his full weight. The sigils flared brightly and the humming stabilized into a stronger, cleaner frequency. Now the lateral coupling. Quick motion. Don't hesitate. He moved, and the systems clicked into place with tangible satisfaction. He had to recalibrate his entire approach to technical work. This wasn't about minimizing stress on damaged components. It was about meeting the armor's requirements for positive engagement. The systems responded to confidence to decisive action. Hesitation caused harmonic dissonance that made the diagnostics spike erratically. His gentle touch had been preventing the very realignment she needed. The armor itself seemed to approve of the new approach. Energy flows normalized where he worked with firm pressure. Flickering systems stabilized when he stopped treating them like fragile glass. It felt less like repairing machinery and more like working with a partner who communicated through resistance and response. Every correct movement earned a steady hum or a brighter glow from the sigils. Every hesitation earned a fluctuation that felt almost like disapproval. Kalen understood now. Standard procedures were designed for inert systems, predictable materials, known quantities. This was something else entirely. A living interface that required active participation. You couldn't fix it from the outside with careful neutrality. You had to engage with it on its own terms with confidence it could match. The repair manual for this job didn't exist in any database. The only instructions that mattered were coming from inside the armor, and they all pointed to one simple truth. Sometimes, being careful is the most dangerous thing you can be. The last power conduit clicked into place with a satisfying resonance that vibrated through Kalen's tools. The armor's systems stabilized, the erratic humming settling into a steady ship-like thrum. Vital signs on his display shifted from critical yellow to stable green. He'd jury-rigged a solution using parts from 3 different systems, bypassed 2 safety protocols he probably shouldn't have, and managed to get the neural sync holding at 80% efficiency. Not perfect, but functional. He leaned back, wiping coolant from his hands. Standard procedure at this point would involve a thanks, maybe a request for water, possibly a debrief on what happened out there. Instead, her voice came through clear and measured, without strain or relief. I endure. You are my witness. The words hung in the workshop's recycled air, simple and heavy. It wasn't an expression of gratitude. It wasn't even about survival. The statement had a ceremonial weight, like a formal declaration entered into some invisible record. The tone suggested this was something she'd been waiting to say, a line in a script that required an audience. Kalen just stood there, a microfiber cloth still in his hand. He was used to fixing things. People said thank you. They asked for painkillers. They didn't declare their endurance and appoint you as their official observer. The phrase "my witness" implied documentation, validation. It meant this moment wasn't just about a life saved. It was about an event being recorded. She wasn't just acknowledging the repair. She was establishing a fact for the record, and he was the notary. His role shifted instantly. He was no longer just the engineer who'd patched her up. He was the one who could verify she'd survived this, who could attest to her continued existence at this specific point in time. It felt less like a rescue and more like he'd just signed a legal document he hadn't read. The words carried a gravity that suggested they were part of a larger ritual, something with historical or political significance he couldn't yet grasp. This wasn't a personal moment. It was procedural. The statement reframed everything. Her survival wasn't just a personal victory. It was a data point in a larger conflict. Him being her witness meant he was now a participant. His workshop, a temporary archive for a truth someone else probably wanted erased. The repair job was over. He'd succeeded. But the consequences of that success were just beginning to unfold. He wasn't just a mechanic who'd fixed a patient. He was a scribe who just recorded the first line of a story he didn't know, for a side he hadn't chosen. The quiet hum of the armor now sounded less like a functioning machine and more like a recording device, logging every second she remained alive. He had a feeling his signature on this particular receipt was going to come with unforeseen billing. He'd adjusted to the idea of political exile. That was a category he could work with. Displaced officials, fallen ministers, even deposed council members. He'd seen them pass through Sector 9 before. Their security needs were elevated but manageable. Temporary protection, discreet transport, maybe some forged documents. The title she offered next changed the equation completely. Empress. The word landed in the workshop like a containment breach alarm. Hereditary rule meant something different than political appointment. An elected official could be replaced. A ruling family represented continuity, legacy, a claim that didn't expire with term limits. Her exile wasn't just displacement. It was active opposition to whoever currently held her throne. This wasn't a concluded political struggle. It was an ongoing conflict where her continued existence represented a direct challenge to the new regime's legitimacy. Her survival wasn't personal. It was constitutional. The armor's sophistication made sense now. This wasn't standard military issue or even special forces equipment. The craftsmanship, the integrated biotechnology, the reactive systems, this was royal protection standard. The kind of investment you only made for someone whose survival mattered on a dynastic level. The sigils weren't decorative. They were heraldic, markers of office that probably corresponded to specific rights and authorities. Every scratch on that plating represented an attack on an institution, not just a person. His workshop had become temporary royal quarters by complete accident. The grimy floor, the scattered tools, the half-dismantled machinery, none of it matched the security requirements for housing a head of state. Standard protocols were laughably inadequate. The door locks were meant to deter scavengers. The environmental filters couldn't handle chemical agents. The communication systems weren't encrypted to royal standard. Every system he'd maintained for years now seemed hopelessly vulnerable. The threat level wasn't just elevated. It was catastrophic. Protecting her meant opposing whoever held the throne, along with all the resources that came with it. Military assets, intelligence networks, economic leverage, all would be directed at eliminating this one person in his workshop. Bounty hunters were just the beginning. Formal military units, sanctioned assassination teams, political pressure on local authorities. The escalation path was both predictable and terrifying. Her presence here indicated she still had allies, resources, some method of evasion that had worked until now, but it also meant her enemies were motivated, competent, and absolutely committed to her elimination. This wasn't about capturing a fugitive. This was about erasing a claim to power. The difference was fundamental. Capture allows for negotiation, mistakes, hesitation. Erasure requires certainty. Kalen understood the new reality. His role had shifted from protector to guardian of a political fact. Her survival itself was a statement. Every minute she breathed challenged the legitimacy of whoever sat on her throne. The repair work was secondary. The priority was maintaining that breathing against forces that would consider his entire sector acceptable collateral damage. The tools in his hands weren't just fixing armor. They were maintaining a counter-narrative to whatever story the new regime was telling its subjects. The weight of that responsibility made the laser cutter feel heavier than it should. Standard emergency protocols assumed temporary risk. This was permanent engagement. There was no handing her off to authorities, no expecting rescue from legitimate forces. The legitimate forces were the problem. His workshop had become ground zero in a conflict that would redefine multiple systems' political landscapes. And he was the only thing standing between an empress and the people who wanted her history rewritten, without her in it. The repair bay's familiar hum now sounded like a countdown to something much larger than he'd ever prepared for. Kalen needed context. Royalty doesn't just appear in repair bays without reason. He asked the obvious question, how does an empress end up as salvage in Sector 9? Her answer wasn't a story. It was an intelligence briefing. The Valyrian dynasty hadn't fallen to external invasion or popular revolt. It fell to coordinated internal betrayal. Key advisors, military commanders, even family members had orchestrated the coup with surgical precision. The attack on her position wasn't some battle loss. It was a targeted elimination attempt by people who knew exactly how her security worked, when she'd be vulnerable, which systems could be compromised. The weapons that scarred her armor were fired by soldiers who'd sworn loyalty to her house. The conspiracy extended far beyond the core worlds. Multiple systems were involved in the usurpation, their resources coordinated through channels that bypassed standard diplomatic protocols. This wasn't a local power grab. It was a fundamental restructuring of galactic power distribution, with her elimination as the necessary first step. The precision of the attack explained why she'd survived. She'd expected betrayal from some quarters, but not from all directions simultaneously. Her continued survival suggested ongoing loyalist networks still operating in the shadows. The fact that she'd reached Sector 9, that she'd evaded capture this long, indicated support cells were still active, still moving resources, still providing intelligence. This wasn't one person running. This was a network in retreat, maintaining operational security under extreme pressure. Every day she remained free was a testament to their effectiveness. Sector 9's relevance became clear. It wasn't just remote. It was politically neutral, outside normal jurisdiction filled with transients who asked no questions. The perfect place to disappear if you had the right contacts. The perfect place to be found if your enemies had better ones. The political landscape had shifted without public knowledge. The official broadcast still showed continuity, stability, orderly transition. The reality was violent regime change covered by expertly crafted fiction. Kalen understood the scale now. This wasn't about fixing armor or hiding a fugitive. The repair job had placed him at the exact center of a conflict that would redefine multiple systems' political structures. His workshop wasn't a medical bay. It was a strategic position in a Cold War that was about to go hot. The tools in his hands weren't just repairing systems. They were maintaining a claim to power that half the galaxy wanted extinguished. The consequences were galactic in scale. Her survival meant eventual challenge to the new regime. Her death meant consolidation of power by people who'd achieved it through betrayal. There was no neutral ground here. Either he helped restore legitimate authority, or he became complicit in its permanent erasure. The choice wasn't whether to get involved. The involvement had already happened. The choice was which side of history his repair bay would represent. The quiet hum of systems that usually comforted him now sounded like the background noise of a political explosion waiting to happen. Every ship passing through the sector, every comm signal, every docking request, all carried potential threats or potential allies. He was no longer just reading energy signatures and system diagnostics. He was reading the early warning signs of a conflict that would eventually consume entire star systems. And he was standing at ground zero with an empress who needed her armor fixed before the shooting started again. Kalen tried to maintain his normal routines, going through the motions of station life while keeping Sarai concealed. He requisitioned parts, filed maintenance reports, made his usual rounds. The station continued its endless cycle of breakdowns and repairs. But the background hum of normalcy had changed. The social fabric of the ring station, usually predictable as clockwork, began transmitting subtle danger signals through its usual channels. Merchants who normally just wanted credit transfers started asking unusual questions. The parts supplier wondered about specific salvage acquisitions from recent runs. The fuel vendor inquired about unusual energy signatures near his dock. These weren't casual inquiries. They were probes, carefully worded to seem like normal business while digging for specific information. The questions always circled back to recent activity around his workshop, to anything unusual he might have brought aboard. Docking records told another story. Kalen checked them as part of his maintenance duties, and the patterns had shifted. Unfamiliar ships were making brief, unexplained visits. They'd dock for just long enough to exchange cargo or personnel, then depart without the usual customs inspections. Their transponder codes were clean, but their behavior was all wrong. No legitimate trader spent that little time in port. No standard freighter avoided standard docking protocols that carefully stationed security patrols changed their patterns. They started making extra passes near his workshop sector, their movements too regular to be random. The timing felt coordinated, like someone had redrawn the patrol routes to increase visibility around his location. The security chief gave vague explanations about sector reassessments when Kalen asked, but the man's eyes didn't meet his. The explanation felt rehearsed, like someone had provided the cover story in advance. Financial transactions showed unusual activity. Large credit transfers moved through accounts that usually handled small-time trading. The amounts were significant, far beyond normal station commerce. The pattern suggested payments being made, bounties being funded. The money trail didn't lead anywhere specific, but its presence indicated serious financial interest in sector activities. Someone was spending real money to get information or influence outcomes. His normal routines attracted attention where there should have been none. Bystanders watched him more carefully than before. Dockhands he'd known for years seemed to study his movements. Even the food vendor noted his orders had changed, his consumption patterns altered. In a closed environment like the ring station, everyone noticed everything. His attempt at normalcy was actually highlighting the abnormality of his situation. The station's social networks began transmitting coded warnings he couldn't decipher. Whispers in corridors stopped when he approached. Comms traffic contained references to special projects and priority acquisitions that might or might not refer to his situation. The language was deliberately vague, designed to convey information to those in the know while remaining deniable to outsiders. He caught fragments of conversations that seemed meaningful, but remained just beyond his understanding. Kalen understood the message, even if he couldn't translate the specifics. Harboring Sarai had made him a person of interest to forces he couldn't identify or quantify. The station itself had become a sensor array pointed at his workshop, every interaction a data point, every routine movement subject to analysis. His attempt to maintain cover was actually painting a brighter target on his back. The social fabric wasn't just warning him of danger, it was demonstrating how thoroughly he was now being watched. Every casual question, every shifted patrol route, every unusual credit transfer added up to one clear conclusion. They knew something was happening in his sector, and they were methodically narrowing down what it might be. The first direct confirmation came from an unexpected quarter. Kalen maintained routine contact with station medical services, requesting supplies under the guise of standard first aid replenishment. The requests were normal enough: antiseptics, biogel, trauma patches. Nothing that would raise eyebrows for an engineer working with potentially hazardous equipment. The response, however, broke every established protocol. Darren, the medic supervisor, arrived in person instead of sending a junior technician with the shipment. He bypassed the normal check-in procedures, his access codes granting him immediate entry without the usual security notifications. His cheeks were flushed either from drink or nerves, and he carried the medical case like it contained something far more dangerous than standard supplies. His eyes kept scanning the corridor behind him, checking sightlines Kalen had never considered before. The conversation started with normal pleasantries before Darren cut straight to the point. He referenced specific bounty amounts rather than general warnings. The numbers were high enough to explain the unusual interest in Sector 9, high enough to make even honest people consider questionable choices. Darren's information was precise and tactical: ship types, hunter specialties, known methods of operation. These weren't random thugs looking for quick credit. These were professionals with specific equipment loadouts and a reputation for thorough work. The warning included operational details Kalen wouldn't expect a medic to know. Darren described hunter capabilities with clinical precision: their preference for neural disruptors over projectile weapons, their use of specialized scanning equipment that could detect life signs through most shielding, their coordination methods that relied on tight beam communications to avoid detection. This wasn't station gossip. This was intelligence, delivered by someone who understood exactly what they were describing. Darren's demeanor indicated significant personal risk in delivering this information. He spoke quickly, his words measured but urgent. He kept the medical case between them like a shield, his body angled toward the exit. The normal easy camaraderie of their previous interactions was gone, replaced by a tense formality that suggested he was violating orders or protocols by being here. Every sentence seemed calculated to convey maximum information with minimum exposure. His advice was unequivocal. He suggested immediate evacuation rather than increased security. The station's defenses weren't designed for this threat level, and trying to fortify his position would just make him a more obvious target. Darren's assessment was professional and bleak. The hunters operated with surgical precision, and their success rate reflected that efficiency. Resistance wasn't just unlikely. It was statistically irrelevant. The resolution was clear and uncomfortable. Kalen now had confirmation that professional hunters were actively searching his sector, with lethal intent. This wasn't speculation or paranoid interpretation of social cues. This was a direct warning from someone with access to information he shouldn't have, delivered at personal risk. The medical supplies in the case felt suddenly insignificant compared to the weight of the information that came with them. Darren left as abruptly as he arrived, taking the empty pleasantries with him. The medical case sat between them, its contents now feeling like both a gift and a condemnation. The bounty amounts Darren quoted explained the unusual attention, the shifted patrol routes, the probing questions. It wasn't just about finding someone. It was about claiming a price that could change multiple lives. The helpful medic had just drawn a very clear line between theory and reality, and Kalen found himself standing on the wrong side of it, with an empress who needed more than bandages and biogel. The docking alarm sounded different this time, not the casual beeps of merchant vessels or the irregular patterns of scavenger ships. These were the crisp, authoritative tones of military-grade craft requesting priority berthing. Kalen watched the external feeds, his earlier preparations for bounty hunters suddenly feeling inadequate. The ships that slid into the docking arms displayed Imperial insignia, their hulls clean and undamaged, their approach vectors too perfect for anything but naval pilots. Their docking procedures followed strict military protocol. No haggling over fees, no customs delays. They transmitted clearance codes that overrode standard station security, their authorization levels far beyond what civilian traffic could access. The docking clamps engaged with synchronized precision, each ship locking into place within seconds of each other. This wasn't arrival. This was deployment. The boarding party moved with coordinated efficiency that made bounty hunters look like amateurs. They emerged from airlocks in perfect formation, their armor uniformly matte black without personal modifications. Their weapons were current-issue military hardware, their scanning equipment the kind that usually stayed aboard warships. Their movements were economical, practiced, each team member covering specific sectors without verbal communication. They operated like components of a single machine, their coordination suggesting extensive joint training. The equipment quality marked them as government-funded. Their armor showed no wear patterns, their weapons no aftermarket modifications. The scanners they carried were calibrated to detect specific energy signatures that matched Sarai's armor profile. Their comms equipment operated on encrypted channels that station security couldn't monitor. Every piece of gear spoke of unlimited budgets and official authorization. Their search patterns revealed specific intelligence. They didn't sweep the station randomly. They moved directly towards sectors with recent energy anomalies, bypassing areas that didn't match their parameters. Their scanners were tuned to detect the particular biomechanical signatures of Royal Armor Systems. They checked docking records from specific time frames, questioned witnesses who might have seen unusual salvage operations. Their movements were too targeted, too informed to be guessing. The presence of Imperial forces changed everything. Bounty hunters operated for profit within certain constraints. These soldiers operated with government authority and resources. Their arrival meant the usurper considered this operation important enough to commit official military assets. This wasn't about capturing a fugitive for credit. This was about eliminating a political problem with state-sanctioned precision. Kalen understood the shift in objectives. Military forces don't get deployed for capture missions against single targets. Their presence, their equipment, their methods all pointed to one conclusion. This was an elimination operation authorized at the highest levels. They weren't here to take Sarai prisoner. They were here to make sure she stopped being a political factor permanently. The rules of engagement had changed from apprehension to termination, and his workshop had just become the primary target. Kalen watched the security feeds, tracking the systematic progress of the strike team through the station's corridors. Their movements showed professional coordination, each member covering specific angles without verbal communication. They moved with the confident precision of people who expected compliance, their weapons held at ready positions that suggested training far beyond station security. The external sensors showed 2 more ships holding position just outside docking range, blocking escape routes without technically violating station protocols. The net was closing with mechanical efficiency. Sarai's voice cut through the tension, calm and matter-of-fact. "They have found me." The statement carried no surprise, no panic, only weary recognition. She might have been commenting on the weather. Her tone suggested this was simply the latest occurrence in a long series of confrontations, another data point in an ongoing survival equation. The phrasing implied multiple previous encounters, each adding to her understanding of pursuit patterns and response protocols. Her reaction was all preparation, no panic. She began adjusting her armor's systems with practiced movements, rerouting power to specific defensive measures Kaylin hadn't known existed. Her fingers moved across control surfaces with muscle memory that spoke of doing this under pressure many times before. She prioritized systems based on the approaching force's composition, adapting her preparations to counter their specific weapon signatures and scanning capabilities. This wasn't emergency reaction. This was operational adjustment. The acknowledgement included tactical assessment. She identified the team as military rather than mercenary based on their formation and equipment loadouts. She noted their approach vector indicated specific intelligence about her location, not general searching. Her analysis suggested she recognized their unit affiliation from subtle markers in their armor configuration. Every observation was practical, focused on developing an appropriate response rather than expressing fear or frustration. Her preparations differed from previous threat responses. She activated systems she'd left dormant during earlier repairs, prioritizing offensive capabilities over pure defense. The armor's energy signature shifted from concealment to readiness, its hum deepening into a more aggressive frequency. She positioned herself covering the workshop's weakest entry points, her movements economical and precise. This wasn't someone trying to hide. This was someone preparing to receive guests. Kaylin's role shifted in that moment. He was no longer just providing shelter or technical support. He became an active participant in her defense strategy. She directed him to specific systems controls, assigning him monitoring and activation tasks that complemented her preparations. His knowledge of the station's infrastructure became suddenly relevant. His understanding of power distribution and environmental systems now tactical assets rather than maintenance concerns. The dynamic changed from protector-protected to partners in a defensive operation. The confrontation represented a turning point rather than another evasion. Previous encounters had been about disappearing, about maintaining cover. This one was about establishing a position, about demonstrating that continued pursuit would involve unacceptable costs. Her calmness came from recognizing this as a strategic opportunity, rather than a simple survival challenge. She wasn't just trying to live through this. She was trying to change the calculus of future engagements. Kaylin understood the shift in objectives. This wasn't about running anymore. It was about making them understand that finding her was only the beginning of their problems, not the end of hers. The workshop stopped being a hiding place and became a defensive position. The tools in his hands were no longer just for repair. They were for changing the terms of engagement. The quiet hum of the armor now sounded less like a patient recovering and more like a weapon charging. Kaylin scanned his workshop with new eyes, no longer seeing repair equipment but evaluating defensive potential. His tools were engineered for precision work, calibrated cutters, sensitive diagnostic equipment, delicate manipulators. None of it offered protection against military-grade weaponry. The security systems he'd installed were designed to deter scavengers and curious crew members, not trained assault teams. The door locks could withstand casual forcing attempts but wouldn't stop plasma cutters. The alarm systems would notify station security of intrusions, but security was already compromised. Every standard defensive measure was laughably inadequate against the approaching threat. The station's infrastructure presented unexpected opportunities. Power distribution nodes ran through the bulkheads near his workshop, carrying enough energy to disable unprotected systems. Environmental controls governed atmospheric pressure and temperature in adjacent sectors. Communication relays passed through junction boxes he maintained. His engineering knowledge revealed potential tactical applications that military training wouldn't cover. Soldiers understood weapons and tactics. He understood how the station actually worked, where its weaknesses lay, how systems interconnected in ways not shown on official schematics. Power systems offered the most immediate defensive options. By manipulating distribution nodes, he could create localized energy surges that would disrupt unshielded electronics. The approach corridor's lighting and life support ran on separate grids he could isolate. Emergency power cutoff switches were conveniently located near choke points. These weren't weapons in any conventional sense, but they could create effective area denial if used strategically. The station's design prioritized safety and functionality, not defense. But those priorities created vulnerabilities he could exploit. Environmental controls provided more limited advantages. He could seal specific sections, alter atmospheric mixtures, or trigger localized coolant leaks. These wouldn't stop determined attackers, but might slow them down or force them into predictable paths. The ventilation systems offered potential for non-lethal area denial if he could introduce harmless but distracting substances into the airflow. His maintenance access privileges gave him control over systems that assault teams would assume were neutral elements of the environment. His detailed knowledge of station systems became his greatest asset. He knew which bulkheads contained critical conduits, where structural weaknesses existed, how to bypass safety protocols that would hinder military operations. The soldiers would be following standard boarding procedures designed for generic station layouts. He knew the specific quirks of this sector, the mislabeled control panels, the backup systems that weren't on official maps, the maintenance crawlways that didn't appear in architectural plans. Their training assumed predictable environments. His experience revealed all the ways this environment wasn't predictable. Kalen realized his engineering skills could create defensive solutions that military doctrine wouldn't anticipate. He wasn't a soldier, but he understood systems in ways soldiers never needed to learn. Their approach would be direct, forceful, based on standardized procedures. His response could be indirect, creative, leveraging knowledge they didn't possess. The confrontation wouldn't be about matching their force with greater force. It would be about using the environment itself as an equalizer, turning the station's ordinary systems into unexpected obstacles. The tools in his hands felt suddenly more powerful as he stopped thinking about defense and started thinking about creative application of everything he'd spent years maintaining and understanding. Kalen traced the primary power conduits with his fingertips, feeling the familiar hum of regulated energy flow. This was the station's lifeblood, the careful balance of supply and demand that kept everything functioning. His entire career had been about maintaining that balance, preventing the kind of system failures that could jeopardize lives and equipment. Now he was calculating how to create exactly that failure, on purpose with surgical precision. The ethical contradiction settled in his stomach like cold metal. The overload strategy required understanding system tolerances better than he'd ever needed before. He wasn't just trying to cause a blackout. He needed a controlled, targeted failure that would disable specific systems while avoiding catastrophic cascade. The main junction could handle a 37% surge for exactly 4 seconds before safety's engaged. The secondary relays would fail after 6 seconds at 22% overcapacity. He mapped the timing like a composer arranging a dangerous symphony, each component's failure point carefully noted and coordinated. Timing became everything. The overload needed to coincide with the assault team's advance through specific corridors. Too early, and they'd simply retreat and regroup. Too late, and they'd be inside the workshop. He coordinated with Sarai, who provided precise estimates of their movement patterns based on military doctrine. Her understanding of standard operating procedures gave them the predictability they needed. She could anticipate their formation, their scanning patterns, their breach methods. His technical knowledge combined with her tactical experience created a plan that shouldn't work, but just might. The risks extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. A miscalculation could trigger a cascade failure that would knock out life support in 3 adjacent sectors. The station's emergency systems weren't designed for intentional sabotage from within. Innocent crew members going about their business might find themselves suddenly choking in airless corridors or floating in 0G when artificial gravity failed. The moral weight of potential collateral damage made his tools feel heavier in his hands. Success depended entirely on the soldiers following their training exactly. Their equipment had specific vulnerabilities to power surges that civilian systems lacked. More sensitive electronics, less shielding, standardized configurations that created uniform weak points. Their procedures called for specific responses to system failures that would position them exactly where the overload would be most effective. They were predictable because their training made them predictable. Their strength was also their weakness. The decision felt irreversible in a way that went beyond technical consequences. Once he initiated the overload, there would be data signatures, system logs, forensic evidence. The station authorities would know this wasn't an accident. The usurpers' forces would have confirmation of Sarai's location and capabilities. This wasn't just a defensive measure. It was a declaration, a signal flare shot into the dark that would draw every interested party toward them. The quiet life of repairs and routine was ending whether he wanted it to or not. Kalen's hand settled on the master control, his fingers finding the exact pressure point he'd calibrated. This went against every principle he'd built his career on. Engineers fixed things. They maintained systems. They didn't weaponize their knowledge to create controlled disasters. The familiar hum of the power grid seemed to question his intentions. The steady rhythm of normal operation feeling like a heart he was about to stop deliberately. He took a final look at Sarai, who nodded once, her armor already shifting to defensive configuration. He made the conscious choice to cross the line. The lever moved with smooth mechanical precision, exactly as he'd maintained it to function. The power reading spiked exactly as calculated, the systems responding to his deliberate misuse of knowledge. He wasn't just protecting someone anymore. He was actively participating in their war, using skills meant for creation to achieve destruction. The workshop's lights flickered as the overload began its calculated progression through the station's nervous system. His identity as a repair engineer evaporated in that moment, replaced by something darker and more necessary. The systems he'd spent years maintaining began to fail exactly as planned, each component dying according to his design. Kalen triggered the overload at the precise moment the assault team reached the main corridor junction. The power surge roared through the conduits exactly as planned, a controlled cascade of energy directed at their position. His calculations were perfect, the timing, the amplitude, the duration. For exactly 3.8 seconds, everything worked according to specifications. Then the electromagnetic effects began propagating in ways his models hadn't predicted. The energy discharge created resonance patterns that amplified through the station's structural framework. What should have been a localized disruption became a sector-wide EMP event. Lights flickered and died across 12 adjacent modules. Life support systems switched to emergency reserves in 7 sectors. Communications arrays went offline as their delicate receivers overloaded. The tactical success disabled the immediate threat but also crippled systems supporting thousands of station residents who had nothing to do with their conflict. The assault team's response revealed unexpected vulnerabilities in their equipment design. Their armor, designed to withstand battlefield energy weapons, couldn't handle the specific frequency combination Kalen had accidentally created. Soldiers convulsed as neural interfaces short-circuited, their advanced targeting systems becoming liability rather than advantage. Weapons locked in safety mode, rendering them temporarily useless. Their coordinated formation broke into individual struggles with malfunctioning systems. The very technology that made them formidable became their weakness against this unconventional attack. The immediate tactical victory created significant strategic complications. Their escape routes were now blocked by sealed emergency bulkheads. The station's security systems, responding to what they interpreted as a catastrophic systems failure, initiated lockdown protocols that Kalen couldn't override from his workshop. Evacuation plans that seemed viable moments before were now impossible. They'd successfully defended their position, but trapped themselves in the process. The perfect defense had become the perfect containment. Station security systems responded with unpredictable autonomy. Automated defense turrets emerged from concealed panels, scanning for energy signatures that matched their programming parameters. Environmental controls began purging atmosphere from areas showing power anomalies. Backup generators failed to engage properly due to the unique EMP characteristics. The station wasn't just damaged. It was actively working against them, based on programming designed for entirely different emergency scenarios. The energy surge created data, signatures detectable across the sector. Every ship with standard scanning equipment would have registered the unique electromagnetic pulse pattern. The usurpers' forces would immediately recognize it as evidence of Sarai's survival and capabilities. Neutral parties would investigate the anomaly. The event wasn't just a temporary disruption, it was a broadcast, announcing their location and technological capacity to everyone within scanning. Kalen's successful defense solved the immediate threat while creating larger survival problems. The soldiers were incapacitated, but the entire station was now alerted to their presence. Escape routes were sealed, Systems were compromised, and their position was known to any party monitoring energy anomalies. The workshop, once a hidden sanctuary, had become the most monitored location in the sector. The tactical victory felt increasingly hollow as strategic realities set in. They'd won the engagement but potentially lost the larger game. The question was no longer how to defend their position, but how to escape the consequences of their own successful defense. The workshop settled into an uneasy silence, the emergency lighting casting long shadows across sparking consoles and scorched plating. Kalen moved through the aftermath with an engineer's methodical assessment, checking conduits for residual surges, verifying structural integrity, noting which systems were beyond salvage. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the cost was visible in every flickering panel and groaning bulkhead. His focus was on damage control, on understanding what their defense had broken beyond repair. He was still calculating repair timelines when Sarai rose from her crouched position. Her movement was the first indication that something fundamental had shifted. The careful, economical motions of someone conserving energy were gone. In their place was a straight-backed, deliberate posture that seemed to fill the available space. She didn't just stand up. She assumed a position, her boots settling firmly on the deck as if claiming it. The armor, still scarred and partially open, somehow looked less like damaged equipment and more like ceremonial wear that had seen recent use. Her communication patterns changed instantly. The requests and suggestions vanished. Reroute secondary power to defensive systems. Seal the main corridor at Junction 7. Prepare the emergency medkit for biological contaminants. The commands were delivered cleanly, without explanation or negotiation. They assumed compliance as a given. The tone wasn't harsh, just absolute, carrying the weight of someone who had given orders that moved fleets and expected them to be followed without question. Her attention shifted from the immediate circle of survival to the broader strategic picture. She began accessing station schematics on a main display, her fingers moving with authority she hadn't shown before. She wasn't looking for hiding places or escape routes anymore. She was assessing defensive positions, resource stockpiles, communication nodes. Her focus was on how to hold what they had, not how to flee from it. The mindset changed from evasion to consolidation. The disabled soldiers confirmed the transformation. As they regained consciousness, their reactions weren't fear or aggression. The first one to sit up took one look at her and immediately lowered his head, a gesture of deference that had nothing to do with their current positions. The others followed suit, their training overriding their mission parameters. They recognized something in her posture, her bearing, that their programming identified as superior authority. Their weapons stayed on the deck. Her language incorporated formal terminology that hadn't appeared before. She referenced the Dominion and House protocols, speaking of governmental structures rather than tactical situations. She discussed succession rights and diplomatic recognition as practical concerns rather than abstract concepts. The vocabulary of survival was replaced by the language of governance, as if a switch had been flipped in her mind from fugitive to ruler. Kalen's role completed its evolution. He was no longer her protector or even her partner in defense. When she directed him to specific tasks, it was with the expectation of a subordinate receiving instructions. His expertise was still valued, but it was now deployed according to her strategic needs rather than his technical judgment. The dynamic felt natural, almost inevitable, as if they were both settling into positions that had been waiting for them. He watched her coordinate the stunned soldiers into a defensive perimeter, her commands clear and unquestioned. The woman who had whispered about gentle touches was gone. In her place stood someone who looked like she'd been born giving orders that changed the course of star systems. The transformation wasn't about putting on a mask. It was about taking one off. The hunted look in her eyes had been replaced by the calculating gaze of someone assessing resources and planning her next move in a much larger game. Kalen understood that he hadn't been protecting a victim. He'd been providing sanctuary for a sovereign who was finally ready to act like one. The repair bay felt smaller suddenly and much more significant. Kalen assumed their next move would involve finding a quieter sector, maybe a derelict mining outpost or a neutral trading hub where they could disappear again. The standard evasion playbook called for reducing visibility, finding shadows within shadows. He was mentally mapping potential hideouts when Sarai's voice cut through his planning, with a single destination. Not a hiding place. Her flagship. The words landed with the weight of a finalized decision, not a suggestion for discussion. The ship represented something beyond transportation. It was the heart of her former fleet, a floating command center that had coordinated system-wide operations. Its recovery wasn't about getting somewhere faster. It was about reclaiming a symbol of authority that her enemies had tried to destroy, where hiding sent one message. Taking back her flagship sent another entirely. It told loyalists she was actively restoring her position. It told her enemies their victory was incomplete. The psychological impact would ripple across every system that had sworn allegiance to her house. The risks were fundamentally different from evasion. Hiding involved avoiding attention. Reclaiming the flagship meant confronting whatever security forces her enemies had placed around it. They'd be walking into a protected area, rather than slipping through unnoticed. The vessel would be guarded, monitored, possibly rigged with traps or tracking devices. Every risk assessment protocol screamed against the approach, but strategic value outweighed tactical safety in this calculation. The ship's systems offered capabilities far beyond mere escape. Its communications arrays could reach loyalist cells across multiple sectors. Its tactical systems provided actual defensive capabilities, rather than just evasion options. Its presence alone would attract support from elements that had been waiting for a rallying point. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was a mobile base of operations that could shift the entire conflict's dynamics. Reclaiming it sent a deliberate political message to both allies and enemies. To those still loyal, it demonstrated her continued viability as a leader. To the usurpers' forces, it presented a direct challenge to their control. The act itself would be recorded, analyzed, and discussed across intelligence networks. Every faction watching the conflict would recalculate their positions based on whether she succeeded or failed. The symbolism transformed a simple recovery operation into a statement of intent. The process required direct confrontation rather than avoidance. They'd be engaging security forces instead of slipping past them. Kalen's engineering skills shifted from hiding their presence to overcoming defensive systems. His knowledge of ship design, power conduits, and security protocols became tools for breaching rather than concealing. The mindset changed from minimizing contact to achieving specific objectives against opposition. Kalen understood the strategic shift completely. Survival was no longer enough. Restoration required visible action that demonstrated capability and determination. The increased risk came with increased potential rewards, actual resources, communication networks, military capabilities. Their existence would become publicly known, rather than carefully concealed. The game had changed from not getting caught to demonstrating they couldn't be stopped. The workshop's relative safety felt suddenly insignificant compared to the possibilities represented by that ship. Every system he'd ever fixed, every power grid he'd ever stabilized, all felt like preparation for this moment. Not to hide a queen, but to help her reclaim her throne. Kalen's journey began with a wrench and a humming power conduit. He fixed broken systems for a living, until one system fixed him right back. His hands, trained to mend circuits and seal fractures, now stabilized a dynasty. An engineer became an ally, a workshop, a throne room. The galaxy shifts not in grand speeches but in quiet choices, like not walking away from what others left for scrap. Sometimes revolution isn't about seizing power. It's about repairing it, and knowing when a gentle touch isn't nearly enough.